Hey guys, listen, I know that this is a little bit late, but I wanted to say a few words around the discussion of sexism in Confucian thought, and I suppose really in Chinese thought and civilization generally. You guys have made a lot of interesting points about it, and it's something that's actually received a pretty good deal of scholarly discussion and debate and investigation. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine, Lisa Lee, recently wrote a book on sexism and Confucianism. And I think a lot of the interest comes out of the fact that it really plays out differently than it would in the West. It's certainly there, and in a lot of ways it's even more pernicious than you have in Western sexism and chauvinism. But it's also something that tends to it tends to get wrapped up in the what we would call the anthropology and the cosmology of Confucian thought. So let me explain that a little bit, and you can put in my 2 cents as far as this discussion goes. Um, you know, in the West, when we talked, if you think about sexism, a number of examples that were given up in this were saying, we talked about the fact that women make 72 cents on the dollar compared to men, and that they have a number of opportunities deprived of them, and a great deal that's sort of benights them is by virtue of just being women, and it's unfair. And that's true, and that's all sexism. But if you ask what a philosopher might ask in this, well, what gives rise to that? What's the condition that makes that possible? One of the things that comes up from that is, and I mean condition conceptually, is that there's a way in the West, and when we are sexist, in which women are seen as somehow being inferior to men just by virtue of what they are, that they're weaker, that women are less intelligent, that they're less capable, that there's something deficient about being a woman that men don't have, and that it ends up playing out that way. And that's sort of the roots of sexism. Even the word chauvinism comes from a way in which the roots of it were, I guess there was a French general in Napoleon's army who was especially sexist, and the way in which he expressed and wrote about this sexism was in these terms. So that if someone is especially sexist, if a man is especially sexist to a woman, what he does is he diminishes her. He treats her small and petty and sort of discards her humanity, right? This is what we see. Well, if you think about it, what we've talked about with Confucianism, that human beings aren't these single entities, right? They're not these single self-contained expressions of personal identity, but they're a web of relationships, a nexus of relationships, and that they are almost events in some sense, that we're not human beings, we're human becomings that emerge out of the web of these relationships, and that our identity depends upon these relationships. If you think about it that way, it doesn't really make sense to be sexist in the standard Western sense of saying just women are lesser. I mean, after all, if women are what they are by virtue of their relationship to men, and men are what they are by virtue of their relationship to women, there's an interdependence there, and you can't diminish one for the other without diminishing yourself, right? True enough. So how does the sexism come out? How does it play out? Because it clearly is sexist. You guys are right. There's only one relationship that doesn't have man on top, either isn't fundamentally masculine, like the older brother, younger brother relationship, or else is with the man on top of a husband-wife or something like that. The reason for the way in which sexism plays out in Chinese thought is more along the lines of what masculinity and femininity have to do with overall. Masculinity and femininity are qualities, they're properties, right, that are expressions within this web of relationships. So masculinity, and this isn't just for Confucian thought, this is true in Taoist thought too. Masculinity is a kind of it means strength, forwardness, the south side of the mountain, dawn, light, yang, all this idea of forward, pushing, thrusting, occupying, positivity, things like that. Femininity, on the other hand, is receptivity, darkness, the north side of the mountain, dusk, that which takes, a shadow, that which is the waning of energy, these sorts of things. And when you think about it this way, there's nothing that is good or bad about either of them. They are what they are by virtue of how the energy is expressed in the world, in relationships, and they need each other to be what they are. Masculinity needs femininity to be what it is. Femininity needs masculinity to be what it is. And really, when it comes right down to it, from a Confucian point of view, there almost aren't any men or women. What there are men-women. There are these bodies that exist as in this web, this nexus of relationships. But what they have is an appropriateness for expressing things. I am a man, as you can see on your computer. And by virtue of that, it is appropriate, a very heavy word in Confucianism, appropriate for me to express in masculine ways, to be forward, to be outward, to be doing masculine things in relationships. And remember, that's not just for me, it's for the nature of the entire web of these relationships, right? That's what makes it right. For women, it is appropriate from a Confucian point of view to be feminine, to be receptive, to play this role within this web of relationships. And the idea within Confucianism is that somehow this would bring out the sense of ren, the sense of rightness of humanity for all of us, in all of us, as all of us. That's probably the best way of putting it, as all of us. It does that. But there is also a problem that comes from this. And the problem is that if you happen to be embodied in a feminine way, and I suppose if you're embodied in a masculine way, it means that you are circumscribed to acting and being in a certain role in the world. I mean, this is your place, and it's not just about you, and it's not just about your choices, and it's not just about what you want. In order for you to be you, in order for the humaneness, for the authoritative conduct, for the rightness, that is you. That is the possibility of you in all of these relationships. Remember, think in this Confucian point of view. In order for that to work, there's got to be a way in which these relationships, in which you do the right thing in these relationships. And that means being a woman. That means taking your place. That means being in the home. That means being a wife. That means being a mother. That means doing all these things. And it's not your choice as an individual, because you're not just an individual, and it's not just about you. Your humanity depends upon resonating rightly in this web and doing your part appropriately in this place. So I say that the sexism is both less pernicious and more pernicious in this sense. It's less pernicious in the sense that you don't have this diminishing of femininity the way you do in the West, that is somehow just a deficiency of some sort. It has a very real, natural force to it, and it's not downplayed at all. That's not soft pedaling, and that really is there, and it's something that actually has a great deal of possibility. Even humanity, a deep sense of humanity to it, because all of us share in it. All of us need it, whether you're a man or a woman, for the full expression of humanity. On the other hand, it means that if that's the card that you're dealt, there are very strict ways in which you are to behave. And when you don't behave in those ways, you don't just diminish yourself, you diminish the self that exists within this web of relationships. So it's even more circumscribed, because it doesn't just mean, oh, you're a bad woman, or you're a naughty girl, or a wild woman, don't get the blues and all that stuff. I've seen some bumper stickers and stuff. I don't know. It doesn't mean any of those things. What was it? The Betty Friedan book. It's none of that. It's far more significant. You're really doing damage to the world that you live in, and it's a much more serious thing. So it's a much more pernicious in that regard. Anyway, something for you guys to think about.